3, 2, 1.
New York, NY. LaunchPod starts now.
Welcome to the New York LaunchPod, the New York Press Club award-winning podcast highlighting the most interesting new startups, businesses, and openings in the New York City area. I'm your host and New York attorney Hal Coopersmith, and in this episode we are speaking to David Suk, the founder of St. Luna Moonshine, again. We first spoke to David almost a year ago, and since we first spoke to him, David has grown his sales and distribution substantially. What's the secret to his success? It's pounding the pavement. Here's David.
Pounding the pavement is key. I try to hit a handful of restaurants or bars to introduce myself every single day. I'm constantly networking because you never know what friend might be able to introduce you to the next restaurant owner that then becomes an evangelist for your brand.
But before we go to the interview, if you haven't already, remember to sign up for our monthly newsletter for unique content and insights at nylaunchpod.com and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite listening app. And we have a sponsor, ResQ, New York State's premier residential rental compliance platform. Have you rented out residential property in New York State? If so, odds are you are not compliant with the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act enacted by New York State in 2019. And if you don't follow the law, your tenant may be legally able to stay in the property beyond the length of the lease, and many more consequences that ResQ is designed to protect against. Just go to resqme.com and enter in some basic lease information so ResQ can take care of the rest and you can relax and be a more profitable landlord. That's resqme.com, RezQueme.com. And with that, find out more about St. Luna Moonshine in another episode of How You Doing?
Hey, how you doing?
How you doing?
I'm doing good.
How you doing?
I'm doing good.
I'm doing good.
What'd you say?
I'm good.
Hey, you? I'm walking in.
Fantastic.
What you say?
How you doing?
So, David, you are back on the podcast. We know you from episode 73. A lot has changed in a little over a year. Tell us about what's happening with St. Luna Moonshine.
It is. Thanks, Hal. Very happy to be here. We are taking on new distribution, getting new distribution partners, and taking on some new states. So despite all the craziness that's happened with the pandemic, we've still managed to grow, which has been a nice feeling.
So one of the things that you talked about on the original podcast was marketing to restaurants and bars, and that was difficult at January of 2021. What are you focusing on right now?
Pretty much the same, but we're doing it more broadly across multiple states. So I think when we talked, we were in New York. We had just started to launch into New Jersey and Pennsylvania. So now that restaurants are opening back up more and more, we're still focused on getting cocktail menus or getting our product on cocktail menus.
And what's been your technique in terms of doing that? Because I imagine that there's been, at least in terms of looking at New York, challenges in restaurant and bars, turnover in terms of opening up new restaurants and bars. How are you marketing your product to these restaurants and bars?
Yeah, the turnover has been pretty extraordinary. The business has always been relatively transient, and I feel like now even more so. It's been really challenging to just get the same buyer to be consistently in the chair. So for us, a lot of what we do is just relationship based and trying to network with whomever we can. And, I think we're in a very unique position where people want to root for the underdog. And that then leads me to new relationships that I may not have found just pounding the pavement on my own.
And how are you finding these new restaurants and bars and in different states?
Yeah, all different. So we have some great distribution partners. I partnered up with Vintage Imports. And in New Jersey in particular, they have quite a few sales reps that I work with on a regular basis. And a lot of times you just kind of walk into a restaurant, sit at a bar and go, hey, I think my product might be a great fit here.
And are you walking in different states and fostering those relationships?
We are. Hal, a lot of it is just walking into bars, sitting at the bar and grabbing a glass of wine and trying to talk to the bartender about who might be the person that decides what cocktails go on the list.
And are you doing that, for example, in Minnesota, which is one of the states that you mentioned you had added?
We will be. So the plan there is to launch in a month or two, and we'll have a distribution partner there that has relationships at restaurants, bars, and liquor stores.
And part of it at least in terms of your business, you have the restaurant and bar, and then obviously with any alcohol, you have the home user. How are you targeting more of the at-home user? Because certainly with the pandemic, we saw that alcohol consumption, liquor sales at home increased. And I can also speak from my own experience.
They definitely did. Well, now that we're allowed to do in-person tastings, I'll mix up a very simple batch of cocktails, say a mule, and then I just make an appointment at a liquor store and sit there for 3 hours and try to get you to taste my product. We do that. And then I also partnered up with a handful of influencers and mixology folks to create cocktails that we post on our Instagram page.
And obviously, you believe in moonshine. We talked about this. You're the founder of St. Luna. What has kind of been the market feedback in terms of moonshine and moonshine adoption as a beverage? Because people certainly have their spirits and wines, beer that they like to stick to, but it seems like you're trying to also add adoption for a spirit. And so how are you getting adoption?
It's been pretty encouraging because if I can get onto a cocktail list, I'm normally one of the better selling cocktails. And I think that's because it's unique and it stands out and it makes an incredible cocktail. So, really, our first challenge is just getting them to try it.
And what bar or restaurant are you the best selling cocktail, for example?
There's a restaurant that does incredible food, great cocktails in Jersey City called Luna. So it's sort of like the perfect match given our namesakes are pretty similar. We've been the number one selling cocktail there of all time.
So Luna, even though it's in New Jersey, certainly a nice synergy for you. And what about, just want to tackle the moonshine as a spirit a little bit more. Adoption, how are you educating the market? So right now you're in a bar or restaurant and gaining adoption there, but how can you get someone at home, or what's been a successful technique for you to get someone, the home consumer?
Oh, definitely. So one of two ways: seeing it on a cocktail list at your favorite restaurant, having your bartender tell you that, hey, this is a brand new spirit that I think you'd enjoy is a great way to do that. And what we'll try to do is have a handful of restaurants in a town carrying us, and then a local liquor store where people can find it. And the other way is really just doing tastings at liquor stores. And, whenever you see somebody set up with their little booth at a liquor store and they're mixing up margaritas or tasting wines, that's a really good chance to have a one-on-one connection with somebody, get them to try your product, and hopefully become an advocate.
So you've talked a lot about the growth distribution for St. Luna. Where do you see St. Luna a year from now? Obviously, we're still in the pandemic. We didn't anticipate that. But where do you see that a year and in the future?
Definitely. More states. We are, as we mentioned, talking about Minnesota launching this year, but we're also talking to folks in DC and Maryland. We're talking to folks in Florida. So my ultimate goal is obviously better penetration within the markets that we're in. So more in New York, more in New Jersey, more in Pennsylvania and Delaware, but adding more states and getting to a point where I hope in a year we'll be able to afford things like bigger marketing, PR budgets, things like that.
What have been some of the challenges in the past year?
Omicron has not been friendly because, unfortunately, all of my tastings for January canceled because nobody wanted to leave the house. I think that's driving a lot of transiency in the restaurant world. You spend a lot of time trying to curate a great relationship with a buyer, and then they leave the industry entirely.
Yeah, I've certainly seen that on my end as well. People getting out of the restaurant industry, having challenges. But aside from the challenges, you've talked about growth. What are some nice success stories that you can sink your teeth into for us, aside from being the best selling cocktail at Luna?
Yeah, we're the best selling cocktail at a number of places, but I wrote down some statistics because I figured you guys would want to hear. Our case volume year over year is up just about 4,000%. It's one of those sticky things where that's easy to do when you're talking about small numbers. But what's encouraging is that that's occurring while we're still in the middle of dealing with this pandemic and the fallout from it. Last year, we added over 100 new accounts across the handful of territories that we're in, mostly restaurants and bars.
And so as you're growing, having that success, you talked about hitting the pavement. What kind of advice do you give to someone who's trying to do this, something similar, that has an idea like you and you fostered it, that wants to grow a brand, and what mistakes did you make that got you to help you grow it in that dynamic way?
Pounding the pavement is key. I try to hit a handful of restaurants or bars to introduce myself every single day. I'm constantly networking because you never know what friend might be able to introduce you to the next restaurant owner that then becomes an evangelist for your brand. I think where I went a little sideways at the beginning of this was I targeted like very big established restaurants that have pretty solid bar programs in place already, and I probably could have built a little bit more of a groundswell going after craftier, smaller places that would have been bigger advocates for my brand.
Well, that is a great note to wrap things up on. David Suk, how do people find out more about you and St. Luna Moonshine?
Yeah, so we are on Instagram at St. Luna Spirits. We are on Facebook as St. Luna Moonshine. And if you wanted to try a bottle, we are on all of the online platforms, Caskers, Reserve Bar, Flaviar.com. So check us out.
And if you want to learn more about the New York Launch Pod, you can follow us on social media at NY Launch Pod. And for transcripts of every episode, visit nylaunchpod.com. And if you are a super fan, David, are you a super fan of the New York Launch Pod?
I absolutely am, Hal.
If you are a super fan like David, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It is greatly appreciated and does help people discover the show.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the New York Launch Pod. For more information, please visit nylaunchpod.com.